Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to be on the panel and to speak with you about this work. And I'm also eager to hear about the other material here. Looking forward to our discussion together. So last year, my co-editor Stephen Weitzman and I published The FBI and Religion, Faith and National Security Before and After 9/11. And I'll say three things. One, just kind of give a sense of how we got into this project, and two, a gist of some of the different points that are made, and then a kind of larger takeaway as a third. So this project started sort of through, it was rather serendipitous. I was teaching at Indiana University and came on faculty there while Steve Weitzman was there. And Steve Weitzman, if you don't know his work, he's sort of officially a scholar of early Judaism, but he's also, now he has a national security practices line on the CV, and he's also doing religion and technology. It's a new project, Religion in Silicon Valley. And so I think he's a great model for a very expansive purview of scholarship. But he was a really kind mentor and colleague when I was in Indiana, and he kept saying, well, Sylvester, we should do something together. And in the meantime, he left and went to take a position at Stanford. And when I was in Indiana, I started work on these national security practices. And so we had a phone conversation. He said, we really got to do something. He was writing an article about the FBI's attending a professional society meeting. People who study religion, it's called the American Academy of Religion. And it's been around for decades. But since the 90s, the FBI had started attending this professional society meeting, in part because people have been criticizing the FBI for not understanding religion and not really knowing how to engage religious communities. If you think of Waco, Texas, for example, and what ended up happening is federal agents, ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, were responsible, in coordination with the FBI, were responsible ultimately for making the decision to firebomb a compound. And they ended up killing a lot of people who were there. And part of the criticism is that they treated people as being fanatical, mentally unstable, because they believed religious beliefs that are not, religion scholars don't think you're mentally unstable if you think that extraordinary entities participate in people's lives or the spectacular. It's a sign that you are engaging with religious tradition. And this is not always obvious to entities such as the FBI. So he was writing an article about their engagement with the professional society. And I was starting a book project that would eventually have a significant section on national security. But very different backgrounds. What we had in common was our friendship and our intellectual curiosity and this intersection. And so he said, let's do a book together on this, and let's invite some folks, because it's a big topic. Religion, FBI, there's a lot to be told about it. Most people don't think about the FBI in relationship to religion. And we did, and it turned out to be a really fun project. We got close to a dozen collaborators to work with us and produce some really beautiful essays in this book. I wrote a couple of chapters, and he did as well. And we co-authored the introduction, and then we had some chapters, of the chapters that were contributed. And so I say that just to say how really I enjoyed so much the kind of collegiality that comes from doing something intellectual together. It was my first collaborative project, won't be the last. I've done some other collaborative projects, the digital humanities stuff, but it's something that I think is worth mentioning, because in the humanities we learn to work in isolation and do really important work that way, but we can also do things together. This is kind of one example. The other is, what's this book about? So we arranged it chronologically, and we wanted to have the book structured in such a way that people could read it from cover to cover and get a sense of historical understanding and theoretical understanding of the FBI during the and into the 21st century. So the first essay actually starts in the 1800s, late 1800s, talking about the absence of a federal law enforcement body and why people imagined that there was a need for one in the United States, and then the creation of the FBI in 1908 under a different name, Bureau of Investigation. Of course, for most of its 20th century history, one person was director from 1924 to 1972. Most of us are familiar with his name, J. Edgar Hoover. And he entered the directorship of that entity, started working in it when the First World War began and then continued. And so the idea of wartime foreign enemies had a lot to do with how he understood the role of law enforcement. And other things began to happen along the way. Lots of other people involved, though not reducible to Hoover. But there's chapters about its early beginnings. There's a chapter on the first, what we know as the first religious community to be targeted by the FBI. And that was an African-American Pentecostal group known as the Church of God in Christ. They had a minister who was a leader of that group from Mississippi. His name was Charles Mason. And he was accused during the First World War of aiding and abetting the Germans. Supposedly they bought his house for him. They were supporting his congregation. None of this turned out to be true, by the way. He didn't speak German. He had no relationship with Germany. His denomination was a pacifist denomination. They taught against war. And so what that indicates is a continuing trend that we see in other chapters of this book, that many peoples in these religious communities were frequently accused of things that they were not doing. And that race had a lot to do with that often. So did political affiliations and commitments. So people who were involved in social justice activism were frequently accused of being communists, because for many decades in the 20th century, being charged as a communist or accused worked in the way that today being accused of a terrorism function. It was an ultimate kind of category. And it was the immediate go-to place where you categorize someone as an enemy of the state. And so there's also an interesting story to be told about the relationship between the FBI and Catholicism. So in the 1940s, the Catholic Church began excommunicating communists. And when Hoover found out about this, he was delighted. He thought, well, maybe the Catholic Church could be an ally in fighting communism. And so he actually was very interested in cultivating a relationship with the Catholic Church. So there's that. It's not always FBI is against religion. You see examples of FBI investing in religion in order to try to fulfill its mission. We tried to avoid a cynical tone in this volume, a move that we have appreciated recently, and the FBI has come under new attacks from unprecedented places. And at the same time, we also wanted to give an honest account about the very deep and perduring problems in law enforcement. And toward the end of the volume, there's material on what has often been called the racialization of Islam, but certainly looking at the post-9/11 era. As this title suggests, we wanted to capture what has happened since 9/11 while not reducing attention to the FBI to what has happened. So there's roughly a full century of attention there. So those are some of the things. We can chat more in Q&A about some claims that I've made in my contributions, the chapters that I wrote. But it is, I hope, a very useful account of the FBI's relationship with religious groups that people aren't used to thinking about those two together, and there's quite a bit to learn. The last thing that we can say more about, what is the overall takeaway? Does it make any difference to actually write a book about this? Or does the FBI even care? And is it just a kind of scholarly conversation? So his chapter he wrote at the end tried to reflect on that, and we can chat about that later. Is this really useful? Is it just you wrote a nice book, but nothing's going to change? I mean, what are the possibilities with doing this kind of scholarship? It's also something we're concerned about.
Great, thanks a lot.